Alrighty, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, and thank you so much for attending our webinar this morning. I am Allison Mohadase. I'm the marketing manager here at Sologent, and we are so excited to have Brian Petro, who is the founder and owner of Bright Productions, go over some wonderful tips and tricks on kind of how to increase your website presence, kind of some tips and tricks and places to focus to really, utilize your website to bring in that, increase your revenue, to generate more leads, and to give you that sense of professionalism in your community. Because as we all know, with the way things have gone with COVID, and if you're in California, fires, and if you're pretty much anywhere else with hurricanes and tornadoes, and you're getting what I'm saying, we're not able to do as many face-to-face interactions. And so a lot of people are seeing a huge drive to the website. And so with that said, Brian is going to go over why it's so important to really make sure that there are certain things that are secure on your site, as well as making sure that there are certain features that really help you maximize getting those leads and keeping that revenue going. So with no further ado, welcome Brian Petro.
Thank you, Allison. So putting this together today was an interesting challenge. I've done, I think, 3 or 4 webinars with Sologent now about different aspects. My marketing company does mostly digital marketing. And now, as Allison pointed out, during these strange times, your website is absolutely one of the most important things you're doing to reach out. So we want to make sure that you get as much as you can out of it. The reason why this particular webinar was a bigger challenge for me to put together than some of the other ones is because I was trying to figure out how deep to go with this. My experience with this group that I'm talking to right now is that we've got owners, we've got marketing managers, we've got C-level folks out there. And so what I want to do, I don't want to just skim on the top and give you stuff you've already heard, but at the same time, I also don't want to dig too deep either. So that's the balance I'm trying to strike here. The goal here is to have a takeaway for everybody where you're going to have something new that you can move forward with. The idea is a checklist of different things to think about with your website and make sure everything that can be done is being done to get the most you can out of your website. So going forward, we are going to switch. There we go. Intro. So just said who we are. Been around for 25 years. We're a full service agency. However, our roots are in web development. So I'm in my groove right here. There are 3 sections of what we're going to be talking about today. One is general marketing stuff. Then I have another slide that's mostly more technical stuff. And then lastly, I've got a bunch of tools in the last section that you can play with on your own website to see what it has to say. And I'll walk you through those tools to see how those work. So general marketing stuff. Let's move this off here. I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but let's move it just in case. General marketing stuff. So, consistent brand message. Okay, this is marketing 101. But think about it, because sometimes you build your website at a different time than you put together your social media stuff, which is a different time than when you had your cards printed, which is a different time than when you had your truck painted. So think about all of the messaging that you put out there, because you really want them to be consistent across the board. So if one person sees printed material or signage or whatever it is, it all works together with the same message. Content. The content on your website. A lot of people have a lot of different approaches about how to figure out what should actually be on their website. How many pages, how big, what should you be saying? And honestly, I think most of the time people end up deciding what to put on their website based on either their internal view of their company, like, oh, our company has these 3 sections of the company. We have these 3 divisions, so we should have these 3 sections on the website. So their internal view of their company, or just kind of their take of when they look at competitor sites, what sections do those sites have? I think there's a lot more thought should be put into what actually should go on the website in the first place. And I would turn it upside down and say the beginning point of thinking about what should be on your website is actually what you're trying to achieve. What, if you get your target person on this website, what do you want them to do? Are you trying to get them to fill out a form? Are you trying to get them to watch a video? Are you trying to get them to pick up the phone and call you? Figure out those goals of what it is you're trying to get them to achieve. And then ask yourself, okay, great. What content do I need to give them in order to get them to actually do those things we want them to do? And anything on your web, look at your website now. Anything on your website that doesn't support that, that doesn't funnel people towards those end actions that you want them to take, cut it. There's no reason for it to be there. This is a goal-oriented website where you have specific things you want them to do, and everything should funnel them towards that. So that's a sea change for a lot of people as far as thinking about what should be on their website. There's certain basics that you have to have. You're always going to have a home page. You're always going to have a contact page. There's certain things you have to have. But in general, try to look at it more about trying to achieve specific goals and what content is needed to do that. Also, going actually hand in hand in that is there should be a specific call to action to do whatever it is you want them to do. So if you're trying to get people to pick up the phone and call, again, marketing 101, I know it's pretty obvious, but if you look at websites in general and you were to see how many of them don't have a call to action, how many don't say, hey, call us right now for a quote, or, you know, fill out this form for an estimate, or whatever it is. And honestly, a lot of the sites that we've built probably are missing those too. So I'm preaching to myself as I go through this. Have an obvious call to action. Have it be above the fold. So in website jargon, we mean before you scroll. Also be thinking about that call to action on a mobile device. The majority of your customers are going to be, or prospects are going to be looking at your website on a mobile device at this point. I say the majority. That number is very close. So it's very likely that they will be on a mobile device. So still above the fold needs to be something that's an obvious call to action on a mobile device as well. Also remember, people don't always land on your homepage. So that's, a lot of people think that's where the call to action should be. Although we've found sometimes we'll even integrate, I've had clients where we have these little micro contact forms. And when I say micro contact form, I mean a contact form that says name, phone number, email, submit. Super basic, super short. But we've actually integrated that into the design of every page on the site. So, you know, upper right-hand corner of every page has a little form, you know, contact me, name, phone number, email, submit. That may or may not be right for your particular situation, but it's a good example of what I'm talking about, where a way to handle it if people aren't necessarily landing on your homepage. Call to action we talked about. Proof it. Yes, we should proof our websites. Shockingly, I found that web developers aren't necessarily the best people to proof websites. So have multiple people look at it. We're not just talking about grammar and spelling. We're also talking about, do all the links work correctly? Do functions, like, perfect example would be, let's say you have updated your website, you're rolling out a new version, and nobody remembers to check if the contact form still works. Is it still going to the right person? So that proofing covers a lot of different things. Another thing that's important with proofing is consistency. With marketing materials in general, you want to be consistent, not just with your message, but like fonts and font sizes and how you bullet stuff and how things are indented and all kinds of things like that need to be consistent throughout your whole site. So proof that. There are some good tools online that will check automatically for things like broken links. You can just Google, you know, broken link finder, and you can find something like that. By the way, sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself and mention, number one, you don't have to worry about remembering all this stuff. This slide's going to be available later. Thank you, Jamie. She's going to email that out when we're done. And if you have questions, please go ahead and send them through in the chat area, I believe. Somebody can tell me if I'm wrong about that. And those will be funneled to me at the end, and we can hit any of your questions. So moving forward, call to action, proofing. Have a plan for content updates. So it's really easy when you're working on a website. especially if it's a new one, to put everything together, put all this work together, roll the thing out, and then be so glad you're done that you then ignore it. Or big updates, same thing, even if it's not a new website, but it's super common for clients to be like, wow, I haven't looked at this thing for 6 months. I'm going to go through it and fix it all up. And then again, they do the same thing. They let it sit. So what the best solution is to actually have a plan ahead of time about how you're going to update the site as you go. That's important for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, not only does it not have, if you regularly update it, hopefully it won't have incorrect old information, but Google cares. For natural search results, they prefer websites that get updated on a regular basis. So an easy way to do that would be to set a calendar item, let's say monthly, where you have a short list of things that you're going to do on the website. You're going to, every month, you're going to, for example, go through and check and make sure there isn't anything old that has changed, different products that you do or don't carry anymore, or special that was happening, or the hours, or whatever, things like that. And then more strategically, also have a plan about adding new content on a regular basis. So let's say you have decided that you want to add a new article to your website about something specific to your industry on a monthly basis. Add that to your list once a month. So you can even ahead of time set up a calendar and say, okay, for the next 6 months, these are my 6 topics. I'm going to roll out one new topic every month. You can even pre-write those. You can pre-write those and have them stored away, sandbag them for once a month, roll out a new one. And again, be strategic about it. Don't pick the topic that you happen to like. Pick a topic that's going to actually drive people to do those things you want them to do on your website. So that covers plan for content updates. Legal. So this has been a bigger issue over the last few years. It's been around for a while, but terms of service and privacy policies on websites are a big deal now. You've got the European standard called the GDPR. Don't ask me what it stands for, I don't remember. But it has to do with how you deal with the data that you collect on your website and keep it private. There's also the CCPA, which is the California version of that, and there's more coming. So the thing that's important here is, number one, protect the privacy of your users. That means when you have contact forms and different ways that people can interact with you online, you do need to treat that wisely. You need to don't give that away. Don't use it in some way that would be surprising. And most importantly, have a policy that you can follow with those. A lot of times, in order to be compliant with these rules, you actually have to have posted policies about them. Now, as far as posted policies go, there are a couple ways to deal with this. Oh, by the way, this also integrates, the GDPR is the one that started, you've probably noticed all these websites that have these warnings, oh, we use cookies. That's part of it too. That's the reason why you see all these notices about using cookies, is because websites are trying to be compliant with GDPR. Bottom line is, there are 2 ways to deal with this. The better way is to get yourself an attorney and have them walk you through how to apply these standards on your website specifically. The cheaper way isn't necessarily as good. There are a bunch of templated policies online, and actually I have links later that I'll share with you. Again, I don't endorse any particular set of policies or this particular one that I'll include in this link, but it appeared to be a popular one, and would definitely be safer than not using one, based on this non-attorney person here. So pay attention to that. And there's even more legal stuff coming up. I'm going to mention Americans with Disabilities Acts on a future slide, and that also plays into the legal stuff. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Lastly, from general marketing things, I should mention email lists. It is shocking to me how many people don't have email lists anymore. And there's a reason for it. I mean, email, when the internet was new 20 years ago, that was the main way that you'd reach out to people, is through email. And over time, email got so saturated with spam that it really became ineffective for business use. However, that has turned around, and spam filters have gotten really good, and legislation to try to block spam has gotten really good. And generally speaking, people don't have their email boxes jammed full of spam the way they did 10 years ago. So it is, once again, a pretty good way and a very inexpensive way to reach out to existing and prospective clients. So if you don't have an email list, it's super cost effective to do that. Start developing your own internal list. Don't go buy somebody else's list. Just, when people sign up for information, or you have a newsletter, or those contact forms, however it is that you want to collect email addresses. And I mentioned here on the slide, offline strategies as well. So if you're salespeople, when they can get back out on the road, or trading business cards, things like that, have a policy of how to get those email addresses into your email list as well. Sending out a once a month email newsletter is really inexpensive and a very effective way to remind everybody that I just listed on that list that you're out there. So I just ran into a potential client yesterday that I was asking them, hey, are you, I don't see an email sign up, whatever. She's like, oh yeah, we've got a bunch of emails, but we haven't been using it. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, how many people do you have in your list? And she said, oh, like 5,000. I'm like, you have 5,000 people on your email list and you're not sending it to people? So we're going to remedy that for her. And I definitely would recommend you do the same. Technical stuff. Okay, I'm going to switch gears. So a lot of these things, by the way, and it doesn't matter if it's the marketing section or if it's the technical section or if it's the tool list section we'll get next. Again, understanding the audience that I'm talking to now, you aren't necessarily the people that make the changes on your website. So just keep in mind when we go through these things, what we're really looking for are things that pop up in your mind that you'd want to check in with your web developer about. So a lot of times we are the web developer, so I'm on the receiving end of a C-level person went to a webinar and they're wondering about XYZ. So that's exactly what you should be doing with these things. So number one on the technical list that I had here, again, somewhat surprising, but somewhat not. We run into a lot of clients who don't have access to their own accounts. They've set up all these different accounts for hosting their website and registering their domain name and email and social media accounts and all these different accounts. They're scattered all over. They're associated with 5 different people, 3 of which don't even work for them anymore. And there is no one repository for everything. And it really can make it challenging to update things, to keep things consistent. So I would definitely recommend organizing all that information. It's going to take a little time to do it, but it'll be worth it. The things off the top of my head that are most important that you need access information to your registrar. Your registrar, like a common registrar would be GoDaddy, for example. There's a whole bunch of them, but I'm trying to explain who does what. That's the company that you buy your domain name from. You also need access to your DNS host. Without getting into a whole lot of details, that's the part where it associates your domain name with the actual address where your website lives. So DNS host. You also need access to your web host. That's the service that actually holds the files for your website. You need access for your email host. That's where your email comes through. If you're using a content management system, like the most popular one is WordPress, you need access to that. And again, full admin access, not just view access to all of those. Social media accounts, all of them that you use. And sometimes, so, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, if you're actively using them, of course, you need access to all those. You also oftentimes will grab accounts even if you're not using them. Like, for example, my company doesn't really use Twitter very much, but we grabbed the Twitter account under our company name anyway, just because we didn't want somebody else messing with it. So it's not just the accounts you actively use, it's any accounts that you have. You should grab those. Also, there's all kinds of other third-party accounts, like, for example, Google Analytics, Google My Business, Yelp. So everything you can think of. Now, what I would suggest you do, some of those is just straightforward. It's a username and password, but it's gotten more complicated. A lot of times they have, two-step verification where they have to text things to a cell phone number. Sometimes you're sharing access with an email address, not actually issuing a new username and password. Big picture though, without getting into the nitty-gritty on those, is I would recommend that you, unless it's an owner, that you not associate that all with one person, just because people come and go. Again, if it's an owner, then that's okay. But other than that, what I would do is I would set up some kind of a generic account. You know, if it was one that was associated, all these Google things I mentioned, for example, you could set up a, you know, my company access at gmail.com, and then associate everything with that. And then that account can be handed between whoever needs to have it. You can change the password on that account if you need. And we've run into so many times where, you know, things are associated with somebody who no longer works there. That email address isn't available anymore, and it creates a lot of headaches. Even more so in nonprofits. We work with some nonprofits, and you'll have great, well-meaning volunteers that will come in, set up accounts, and then they're gone, and it's actually worse than never having set it up in the first place. So get all that access information together. Another item, SSL. SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. Doesn't really matter what it stands for. It has to do with security on your website. You will notice most websites now, when you look at the address at the top, this one's Soligent's, it's got the little padlock on the top and it says HTTPS. What that means is that information between the web server and the user is encrypted. That's an important thing to do for a couple of reasons. Number one, users expect it, and they feel if they are technically savvy at all, they will feel a little more comfortable on your website if it's got that. Frankly, the more important reason is that Google really likes to see those certificates. Google's encouraging the whole world to have SSL certificates. And so they actually punish your natural search results if you don't have it. So most of you probably have this set, but check. And if you don't have that, again, it's actually fairly technical to get it set up. I would definitely talk to your web developer about getting that set up. It absolutely has to be done if you are doing any payments online, any private information in forms, then it's not even an option. But honestly, everybody should be doing it. So that's what I'm talking about with the SSL certificate. ADA, I mentioned that earlier. That's Americans with Disabilities Act. And what that has to do with, and again, I've mentioned this in previous webinars, so I'll keep this brief, but if your website, people think of ADA, they think of like a restaurant where you have a bathroom that isn't wheelchair accessible, and that would be an ADA violation, and you're open to lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera. Websites actually have this issue too. And over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of website owners that have been sued because their websites were not set up for vision impaired, is usually what it is. It's not super hard to be ADA compliant. Mostly what it means is making sure that there are text options behind all of the imagery that's on your website. There's some other things too that have to do with making sure there's enough contrast between your text and the background color. There's things about allowing users to be able to change the size of the font. The important part here is to do what you can to be ADA compliant, because those lawsuits are actually happening. I thought at first that maybe it would just be clients with deep pockets that would be approached by somewhat parasitic attorneys over this. But it turns out that even the small guys can get harassed by these guys. The way I've seen it happen is that an attorney will find a particular industry that they're interested in. They'll file real lawsuits against a couple, and they'll do all the paperwork and go through this, spend the time and the money to actually sue like 2 people in this industry. And then they'll go find themselves a list of 1,000 different companies in that industry, and then carbon copy those 1 or 2 legit, real lawsuits. They file 1,000 lawsuits that are like, all the paperwork doesn't even apply to you. It's all about this first one. They're literally carbon copying it. And then they go down the list and say, hey, we'll settle for $2,000 for every single one going down the list. And every business owner goes, oh, $2,000 to make this go away? Okay. And everybody pays up and they walk down the road. So I've seen that happen. So be aware and be ADA compliant, so you don't have to worry about that. Mobile. So I mentioned mobile earlier. Google for years now, this is not new. For years, Google's been saying that more people have been searching on mobile devices like phones and tablets than they are on desktop now. So you need to be thinking primarily, what does your website look like on a mobile device? How fast does it load and how does it work? Are the links big enough, and is there enough space between those different things that you click on that big fat fingers can actually click on the correct thing? There are some tools that I will show you on the next slide for testing that kind of thing. It's also interesting to me that from a natural search point of view, again, Google gives, I was gonna say Google gives priority to mobile ready websites, but it's actually the reverse. I think they punish people who aren't mobile ready. So keep that in mind. It'll actually affect your natural search results if Google is not happy with the mobile friendliness of your website. They also, the way search engines work, specifically Google, because that's the one that matters the most, they run around and take pieces of information for every website. They index websites to know what's in there. So when somebody does a search, they can decide which one is the best one to show in a search results. What's interesting to me is starting in the last year, the information about your website that they store, it's not actually a full copy, but for this conversation, we might as well say they keep a copy of your website. The copy of the website that they keep is the mobile version. That's the one that they look at and care about when they're deciding what website to show, regardless of whether someone's actually even searching on a mobile device. So if I'm doing a search on a desktop device, Google's looking at the mobile version of your website and deciding if it's good enough to show to me when I do a search. That's new in the last year. So mobile's important. Maintenance and update plan. Okay, so we talked earlier about a plan for updating the content of your site. That was in the marketing part of this talk. But we also need a maintenance and update plan for the technical part of your website. So there's a couple different aspects to that. Part of it, and the most common part, again, I mentioned WordPress is a very common content management system, a platform to build websites on. It's also kind of known for having poor security. It's not so much that it has poor security as much as it's so popular that it's really targeted a lot by people who want to cause trouble. So, especially for WordPress, you need to have a plan to keep that updated on a regular basis. Now, sometimes, depending on where you're hosted, the host will do that for you automatically. Sometimes you need to make sure that your web developer is doing it for you. I think it's okay. Depending on the client, we have clients that we have scheduled like monthly to check on that. Some we do quarterly to check. And it's not just the platform itself like WordPress, but it's also, a lot of those are modular and have little plugins that you can add. And all of those plugins, those are actually the most common ways for websites to be compromised. So you want to make sure that you're using popular plugins that are updated for security as well, and that you're implementing those updates. Now that's for kind of a out-of-the-box WordPress type website I'm talking about. Then there's a whole nother discussion that you have if you have a big custom website. So those websites are built on platforms themselves that can age out over time. So when you are building out a new website that, let's say, is built from scratch, you need to have a conversation with your web developer about, well, what's the plan to keep this up to date and keep it secure, because it's custom and it's not, built on one of these pre-made platforms. In some ways, those custom websites are much more bulletproof because they're not a target, because thousands and thousands of people aren't using that same platform. But they also can age out. They can be built on technologies that lose favor or need to be updated. And really complex websites, if they're not updated on a regular basis, they have a lifespan. It's not unusual for a really complex website to run its course in 3-4 years. So keep in mind, especially if you're spending top dollar on a brand new from scratch website, have a conversation about the lifespan of the website, because it will have one. It's not going to be something that you'll be able to use forever. So there is technical stuff, and we already hit that slide. Let's talk some about tools. So before I get into these tools, I want to have a preamble to them, which is some of these tools, they lend themselves to be used as a scare tactic. We'll run through these, and you can run your own website through them. If they pop up and they say that there's all kinds of work that needs to be done on your website and your website's horrible, don't let that completely worry you immediately. These are good, valuable tools, and that's why I'm including them. They're a good place to start a discussion with your web developer about if there are areas for improvement. I say that because I'm on the receiving end of this. It's super common for salespeople, for example, to use these to try as a scare tactic and say, oh, your website's horrible, look at all this stuff. And a lot of the things on these tools are legitimate and good things that you can work on. A lot of them are also picky things that don't really matter. So don't get too bent out of shape when you see these. Just take them in stride as the useful tool that they are. So let's talk about some of the tools. This first one is a word cloud tool. This is what a word cloud looks like. Basically this tool, and again, you don't have to worry about remembering these addresses here because you're going to have them later. But the idea behind this tool is that you can plug your website address, this one I use, Sologent's website, into the tool, and it will show you a visual representation of what are the most popular words being used on the website. The value of this tool is that when you are working on a website, you have an idea of what you're trying to say, and that might not actually be accurate as far as what other people see when they're coming to the site, especially if the people that are coming to the site in search, it's not human beings that we'll worry about first. It's actually programs. Google's running programs trying to figure out what your website's about. But the most common way that Google will figure out what your website is about is by looking at the words you use on the website. So if you use a tool like this, it very easily and quickly shows you, oh, an automated tool thinks this website is mostly about products, dealers, financing, solar, Sologent. And then there's some other things as it peters down through. But it immediately will show you what are the most popular words on your site. And if you were an automated program visiting the website, what do you think this website's about? So what you do is you look at this tool, and if you see things that are you don't think this accurately shows what you're trying to say on your website, you can do something about it. You go in there and you change the wording on your website to include the words that are more what you're looking for more, and decrease the ones that don't accurately represent what your message is. So that's and that one, I brought that one up first because that's a less common little trick. It's mostly for search engines. Mobile. Okay, so I mentioned that Google, both you and Google should care a lot about how mobile friendly your website is. There's a bunch of tools out there that will tell you and grade your website on its mobile friendliness. There's really only one that matters though, it's Google's. So this is Google's tool that will test and tell you what Google thinks about how mobile friendly your website is, and that's the one that matters. So you should plug your website into that tool and see what it says. And there's all kinds of little specifics that it'll do about how fast it's loading and where and which parts of it and why is it mobile friendly. Lots of good information in there. The next one is a speed test. And again, how fast your website comes up. 20 years ago, that was almost all you cared about with a website, because a website, it might take 30 seconds for a page to come up, and that was okay then, but it's not okay now. And especially when people are on mobile devices, speed actually does matter. Google will prefer to show websites in their search results that are faster. And especially mobile devices, as mobile becomes more and more important, it's more, generally speaking, mobile devices have slower connections. So this tool here, it doesn't just time your website and say how fast it is, but it specifically says which parts of it are slowing you down and gives suggestions about how to speed it up. It's a really good tool. And again, because the tool, as much as I could, I was picking tools that came from Google because those are the ones that are going to affect your Google search results the most. Google Analytics. Okay, most of you probably are already using this, but if you aren't, this is the industry standard for getting data about who's visiting your website, how often, is it more, is it less, which parts of your website are more popular than others. There's even real-time tools on there where you can see how many people are on the site now. I would mention to you, there is a proviso about any of these statistics, and this is actually true of all things marketing. So it's not just this, it's if you run an ad on TV or a newspaper or anything, the numbers that this will come up with, it'll say 5,000 people visited your website in the last 2 days. These numbers are good numbers for comparison and to keep an eye on whether they're scaling up or they're scaling down, but you cannot take the exact numbers that they say to the bank. If you pick 3 different tools to measure the same thing on your website, you will get 3 different numbers. As a matter of fact, I would go even a step further. Perfect example is Google, of course, sells ads on their search engine, and they sell them by the visit per click. And so they have a tool that tells you exactly how many people went to your website through the ad that you bought from them. But then, so let's say you bought ads for a week and it said you had 1,000 visitors from these paid ads. If you then go to Google Analytics and look at the same thing and say, hey, how many visitors did I get from paid ads? It will say like 1,200 or 800, or I guarantee you it will not tell you exactly the same number. And they're both tools from Google. So don't let that frustrate you. Just understand that these are all numbers. You have to have something in order to measure whether something's working or not. And so they, generally speaking, are valuable in comparison to themselves, but they are not numbers that you can be hard and fast on. So be aware of that. Google Search Console, that's another really valuable tool, and it's one that's underused for a lot of people. It's a tool that Google gives that basically lets you look under the hood and see how searchable your website is. It'll tell you, for example, if there are pages on your site that are being blocked that Google can't get to. Sometimes you block a website on purpose. Like if it was a development website that you were working on building, you really don't want people ending up on that site while you're still building it. So you'll block Google out, and then occasionally people will forget to unblock it. That would be a problem. You would see that in Google Search Console. Google Search Console will tell you, when was the last time that Google indexed your website, looked to see what was new on it. Google Search Console is a place where we can give Google a pre-digested sitemap of your website. So we can tell Google all the pages that are on your site, so it doesn't have to go find it. You give it to it. So there's all kinds of good stuff in Google Search Console that can be helpful with natural search results. This next one over on Buffer, miscellaneous tools. These are kind of generic grading tools. And there's a handful of them. There's like 6 or 7, and they will test all kinds of different things about your website. And some of them give you an ABC grade. Some of them will give you like 1 through 100 grade, and it'll tell you which areas could use some help. There's actually a ton of these tools out there. I thought this page with this list that it has on Buffer was a pretty good one. Again, be aware that some of these tools are very picky, and their goal can be to scare you that you're doing something wrong. So just be aware of that. But I think these are some pretty decent tools if you want to just plug your website in and see what these tools think of your website. Lastly, I mentioned I was going to give you an address for privacy policy templates. This one, freeprivacypolicy.com, was one I found. I was specifically looking for one that was free, and it looked relatively professional. Not an attorney. Soljan and I are not endorsing this particular one, but it's a good place to start looking. And obviously much less expensive than hiring an attorney, which would be my preferred method. And that are my tools. I had a feeling I was going to get through this one faster than I have on some of the other ones, Allison and Jamie, but I'm hoping that I have time for a few questions if they came through. Allison and Jamie.
Yeah, let's leave it open. Hey, let's leave it open here for some questions. Feel free to drop it in the Q&A box or chat box, whatever you prefer. We'll just hang out here for a moment. And all these resources, like Brian said, resources and tools mentioned within this webinar will be provided to you in an email. So feel free to run your website through that, take a look, have some fun. and see what spits back out on the other end of those tools.
Yeah, and if we don't have any questions, that's okay too. We can all get to our busy days as well. As you mentioned as we were starting out that we've got fires going on here. So I've got one page where I'm looking at this, and then over here on this screen over here, I'm looking at air quality, which is still okay here. We had one staff member that had to evacuate a couple days ago, but she was able to go back. I got to check in if she went back yesterday or if she's going back today. So air quality is improving where we are anyway.
Slowly but surely.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. We really, really appreciate you going through all of these amazing resources. It always is super helpful for all of us to, you know, deep dive into, especially since, let's face it, websites are moving, breathing things. And so it needs maintenance, and once you think you're done, you know, you need to set up a cadence, kind of like cleaning your house. No matter how much, you know, how well you do it, you still got to go in and, you know, spot check and do other things later. So, thank you everybody for attending. Yeah, so easy once you get it in a really healthy place.
Yep.
Thank you all for attending. If you do have questions, of course, reach out to us. Brian, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. We greatly appreciate it. Resources are on their way in an email. Have a wonderful day, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.